As jy dink jy verstaan net eenvoudig nie die ander generasies nie, moet jy nader skuif. Want ons gesels vanoggend met Marko Stavrou. So hy is beter bekend as the Gen Z guy op sosiale media. En hy is ook die hoof van Genlink en ons gaan heerlik gesels vanoggend. Good morning, Marko.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's our pleasure to have you here, and hopefully we can understand each other and our colleagues slightly better that fall into different generations. Marko, but before we get into that, it was interesting to read that you were like the Henley Business School, just 17 years old, one of the youngest guys ever. What sparked your interest in business?
Good question. So it started in high school, and when I actually first posted on Instagram in 2015, and listening to podcasts while I was in high school, having access to this technology and globalization really just opened my mind to what's possible as a young person. And that's what Gen Z is all really about, which we'll chat about, is this possibility of creating things that back in the day would never be able to do. And so I listened to podcasts, started my first business online, and thought, why not go for Henley Business School? And I was so privileged to be able to study there.
You're talking about Gen Zs realizing that there's so much more possibilities out there. And sometimes you'd say that the Gen Xs and the previous generations sort of are rather peeved by that.
Yeah.
I mean, why didn't we see the gap? It's a thing for Gen Zs that Gen Zs see the gap that other generations never did.
And the reason behind that is because their brains were actually rewired. So I speak about something called the Great Rewiring between 2010 and 2015, where because of access to social media and technology, their brains actually changed for worse and for better. One of the better things being that we actually see we can create anything, and everyone wants to be a social media influencer. And, if you ask many listeners and viewers will say, their children want to be influencers, creators, and that's because they realize that they can create value, they can create exchange of ideas. And so for me, that was just the start of it, to say, I can actually go out and consult big companies and link generations at 21 years old. And for most people thinking that's like, you're supposed to be an intern, at these companies. You're supposed to be bringing the coffee, right? Yeah. But it's this different framing that we went through where our parents were overprotective, and actually we were addicted to social media. And my recent reports showed that over 70% of the respondents spent more than 5 hours on social media. And so
5 hours?
5 hours a day on social media. And so just that thinking is what we're talking about.
That's quite incredible. I just want to mention something, because you spoke about you're supposed to be an intern, yet you go and you feel like you can make a difference. You also work for Standard Bank.
Yes.
How do you handle at such a young age? Because you're speaking about 21, 20. How do you handle the pressure to work at these corporations, being such a young person, but going in there with such confidence?
Yeah, I think there's a big thing is self-esteem, and what's proven from when I did my behavioral stuff at Henley Business School, that showed that religious people and married people are happier. And the reason being is because they're locked into community. And so if I look at my heritage of being Greek and being in those households, there was a high level of self-esteem and community. And that is what is so key, because it stems a young person's mind and values and social norms that then believe that they can create value. And I think a lot of families are missing that in today's world. And we look at the loneliness pandemic, which I'm sure we can touch on, and it's really prevalent.
We have to speak about it. Let's talk about it now, the loneliness pandemic. Especially after COVID, we tend to revert to our own little holes in the ground and hide and do our own little thing. And like you said, the connection with community and the connection with the social integrity of a community is very, very important. And most of us have stepped back from that.
Yeah. So I'll give you a funny example I always like to reference, is cinemas. So young people no longer go to the cinemas. If we look at Ster-Kinekor and what's happened to the numbers, and they no longer have to organize anything. They no longer have to communicate with other people, because all that they do is they sit at home, they randomly FaceTime their friend, they go on a Netflix series, they order Uber Eats delivery, they never have to organize or go out to do anything. And all of those conflict points and thinking about, oh, flip, is this person busy and ahead of time, and going out and standing in the line and with delayed gratification is so important to the whole experience. That's why, like one of my mentors, Trevor Noah, he says to me, he went on those rides, at those parks, and they skipped all the lines, and he absolutely hated it. The reason being was because when you stand in those lines and you wait and you talk with friends, that creates that fun experience. And I think that's what young people are losing today, is the reason why they're so meaningless and unhappy is because they're not going through the hardships of community and that friction that creates the happiness.
Wow.
Sure. You know, I find it very interesting because you work in a work environment with so many different generations, yet Gen Z is a generation I sometimes find challenging, if I'm honest, to work with in different aspects. And I think, you know, when they speak about generational gaps and how people approach things differently, sometimes it does feel to me like how I approach something and how a Gen Z approaches something is completely different.
But your generation is heartless, Jim.
No. Oh, wow.
There's the divide we see.
I'm going to punch him now. Is it really that different is it in my head, or is it really that different generations do approach things, task, communication differently?
So of course there's always going to be behavioral and humanity that is the same. You know, I think that we have to be careful to say, oh, we are so all different, you know, especially in a South African context where, you know, we're behind in technology and not every kid is addicted to social media,
Yes.
you know. But if we look at the majority of how they perceive the world, the average spend less than 2 years in one organization. That's one of the stats and what I'm
Less
working.
than 2 years.
Less than 2 years they leave the organization. And the big reason I'm noticing and believing is that it's because they believe they've got more options. It's not necessarily that they only think that the work is tireless and they hate their job and they hate their boss. It's because they realize that why would I want to be 9 to 5 for a cuck salary, excuse my language, if actually we want to go and travel the world and be this digital person who's working on their computer and experiencing life.
Yeah.
And many of their friends they've never met.
Yes.
Oh,
And that's an interesting thing to say,
Wow.
because if you're engaging with someone overseas or on a dating app and you're gaming's such a big thing, and you've never meeting these people, what does that actually mean from a
You've never
real
been to their
connection?
homes.
Never been to their homes, you never met their parents, you've never gone through hardship together. And so, yes, there is a big divide in the workplace, and I believe one of the ways that we can navigate that is through digital communication.
Marko, just before the break, we stopped at communication. How to communicate better? Tell us.
So if you've ever tried to email a Gen Z, you'll know it doesn't work, because they don't ever respond. So you have to WhatsApp them and tell them I've emailed you.
And then they haven't blue-ticked the WhatsApp either.
And they've got the grey tick, so now you don't know if they've read the message. And if
Yeah.
you try and phone them, they've got so much anxiety, they won't pick up the phone. So there's no way to communicate with them. But that's why social media and these channels are really, really important, because what LinkedIn used to be a recruitment social platform
Yes.
is now a social media and storytelling and narrative platform where people are sharing their ideas and sharing their stories. And so that transition from something being very technical and, you know, one-dimensional to now narrative and storytelling is like TikTok. You know, I always laugh because when I speak at these conferences and I say, you know, the average person will be, let's say, 35 or 45, and I say, raise your hand if you've got a TikTok account. And 70% of the room will raise their hand. And so if I say to them, well, if you have a TikTok account, then don't you think your peers will? And in terms of reaching and influencing them, even the older generations, and a lot of them will say to me, Marko, because my kids are on TikTok, so I just want to connect with them. And that's a very important thing, to have Roblox, to have Nintendo Switch, and to connect with your children and the next generation where they are. And it's so important. And that's why being locked into a community, you know, a lot of parents will say to me, Marko, but when we send our kids to do play dates, all they do is they go on the devices. Why?
Yeah.
Because all of their friends are on the devices. And so I think the solution is if we can, as a communities, say school-free phones, where there's no phones at schools, or after hours when you're connecting, let's not be on the devices.
So it's almost like a skill you have to taught someone. Like you have to
Exactly.
teach that skill, because we're so used to, and like you say, it's a generational thing, and you know, it's connected to, like, I don't know, gaming and social media, whatnot. So you're so used to it. So you have to reteach that skill almost to be in person and communicate with someone.
be present.
To be present.
And one of the things I speak about is this concept called complex division of labor. And what I mean by that is the world has got so complex when it comes to just uncertainty and the economic status of South Africa and the world, where parents just don't have the time and capacity to actually spend time focused with their children and doing stuff with the devices. So they just give their phone to the
Yeah.
kids at the restaurant because actually just so tired and just trying to manage their life and get through the day-to-day living. And that's a real concern from where we've come from, where communities would support each other and,
Yeah.
you know, job certainty and just, where we are with inflation and interest rates.
I have kids at varsity, and I see a tendency is that they seem to do everything over social media
Yes.
or with an app, And that includes relationships with friends. It's always an app. It's like you say, it's FaceTime. It's WhatsApps. There's a lot less in-person connection.
Yes.
How is it, for instance, affecting, let's go the love side, how's it affecting getting relationships going
Yes.
with the opposite sex? Excuse me,
So-
that's very stereotypical of me, with anyone else.
Yes.
How difficult is that? Is that holding them back?
Absolutely. So, I mentioned it before, but I call them the anxious generation.
Yeah.
Anyone born after 1995 I call the anxious generation because a lot of them have got high anxiety. And if we look at some of the stats from 1965, the average time spent after hours just engaging was between 3.5 and 4 hours. Now it's decreased since 2010 by 90 minutes. So we're looking at the average young person spending less than an hour and a half after school just engaging. And so those social and EQ and emotional skills are just decreasing. And that's then transitioning into relationships. So 1 in 7 young males don't have a close friend. 50% of young people don't believe in marriage. They find that it's really inconvenient, right, and hard because they haven't had those deep, meaningful friendships and hardship, whether that's at home environment with divorces. 50% of marriages in divorce in South Africa. And so it's stemming from the top and the relationships that they're seeing with their cousins and their family. And if I look at my own family, as a supposedly close Greek community, half of my family's all around the world.
Yeah.
And so I'm not seeing them, I'm not connecting to them. So I'm having to go to my work friends, my paddle and running club friends, who are different cultures, and it's different with family and friends. And so, if we look at dating apps, the average young male has to swipe 200 times right to get one in-person coffee. Now, what does that do to a young man's social mind when we realize that we cannot actually go out at a bar or on the street and meet up with a girl?
200 times before one date.
Before one in-person coffee date.
Sure.
And honestly, I've noticed that trend in my kids as well. It's tougher to make personal connections, even if they're on varsity and they're not studying on the internet. It's a moment that they're there, present at university. Still, it's tougher for them to make friends, like you say, and create and have relationships.
Because a lot of them have these internet friends.
Yeah.
So when you're out and you don't know anyone, what's the first thing you do? You go and introduce yourself. And if we're in an environment, we're sitting and engaging. But now, if you guys can imagine, I'm on my phone speaking to someone, you're on your phone speaking to someone, they're on their phone. Now we're like, but they already got friends. Why would I go introduce myself? They're already connected to someone. They're in their own cliquey groups already.
Right.
And so there's that natural inclination of, when we behave and when we engage each other, that's being lost.
You refer to the fact that this is stemming from the way they've been taught, and that is the responsibility of the previous generations.
Yes.
So, people dissing other generations, apart from Jennifer's, obviously, should take a step back and realize that it's not all other people's issues. It's my issues that I imposed on them.
Unfortunately, the older generations and even younger, everyone, we don't realize the power of the internet. We don't realize the power of these smartphones because we've never had experience before. It's the first time that parents had these children who had these devices.
Yeah.
And so I think we just haven't realized what they've done to our brains, our psychology, and what it's done to just society in general. And so that's why we're having this conversation to say, how do we mitigate and manage this problem? Because if it doesn't start at schools, if it doesn't start at homes and at workplaces, then we're going to be sitting in a very, very bad position moving forward.
Yeah, I think no matter which generation you're from, every generation has good and bad to it, some really strengths and weaknesses. And I think the important part is to get to learn the generation and get to know people and understand people, because only once you really understand someone can you work or cohabit with them properly. So what do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions that we perhaps have about Gen Zers?
Well, one of the funny ones from a workplace point of view is a lot of people think that young people just want to work fully digital, and that's actually not true. The prime is 3 days in person and 2 days online. And the reason is because they believe that if they're in person, they're going to get a promotion because they're actually going to spend more time with their boss. And so if we look at what's the most important things to Gen Z, it's career growth, and salaries only last, it's third. So it's career growth, and then are they going to be engaged in a place of belonging and feel valued, and then actually salary. So they're realizing that money isn't everything, and that actually meaning and purpose and friendships are more important. And so those are some of the misconceptions to say, oh, they just want to be on the devices and game all day. No, they want a game because they want belonging. They want connection because they're not getting it elsewhere.
Wow.
Sure.
It's interesting that it's like you say, it's belonging, and if it's making a mark in my career and career orientated, then it's ideas and concepts and worth.
Yes.
It's a lot about worth and not about the money you earn, but more about the personal worth.
Correct. And enjoyment, because so many people are unhappy about what they're studying, about where they're working, and then they just do a full 360 transition. I get these emails and phone calls saying, my kid has totally lost the plot, they're on a yacht somewhere. And I'm like, that's totally normal because they've grown up you've overprotected parenting them, the schools have told them exactly what they need to do, and now they realize, I've never done anything for myself.
Rebelling, yeah.
And so they're actually just saying, let me go and experience the world and figure out myself. And that's why self-awareness, I think, is so important for many young people to spend time doing psychometric testing, spend time doing job shadowing. I mean, I've done over 200 random stranger coffees since high school. So you can imagine 200 conversations with just different random people, adults from all different walks of life, in corporate, in sports, pickleball. I played for South Africa in Ghana, and those exposed me to my own self, And I think a lot of young people have never even met a stranger for coffee that's not in their age bracket,
Yeah.
Wow. Marko, it has been fascinating speaking to you and hearing how we can approach people differently. And perhaps, like, we said, sometimes it's also a little bit of self-reflection, not just a blame, and treating people with slightly more grace once we understand where they come from. Thank you for sharing your knowledge this morning.
Thank you. And I hope our message has brought hope and not fear as well, because at the end of the day, it's through this collaboration and this platform that we're actually because at the end of the day, I just want us all to be connected from a family point of view, from a friends, and then from a work point of view.
Sure. Interesting. Daar het jy dit wys jy net weer eens hoe belangrik is familie en ook om mense beter te verstaan. Dit is dan Marko Stavrou, bly ingeskakel, ons is nou weer terug.